All right, it is just a minute after 7. We can go ahead and call the roll.
Maria Ryan,
Here.
Stacy Gloss, Morgan Johnston, Elizabeth Mashewski,
Here.
Todd Rusk, Andrew Stump,
Here.
Steve Wald.
Here.
All right, well, we have a quorum, so let's turn to, do we have any changes to the agenda this evening? No. All right, let's take a look at the minutes from our previous meeting. Maybe if we could get a motion to get them on the floor and then take any changes or corrections. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Is there any discussion, any changes? No. I'm actually just going to propose a slight wording change, which it was correct when Kate sent the minutes to me to take a look at, and then I introduced an error that I'd like to unintroduce. It describes PACE as backing the financing of projects, and it really should say financing to finance the projects. Is that change acceptable to our mover and our seconder?
Yes.
All right. Are there any other changes? All right. All those in favor of approving the minutes as corrected signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? All right, those are approved. Next, we'll turn to public input. Do we have any members of the public that wish to address us this evening? All right. Let's move on to our communications, and we'll start with, we have Brad Bennett has joined us this evening to talk to us about the stormwater management program.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you about Urbana's stormwater management program. Thank you, Scott, for inviting me. We have 2 assistant city engineers over in the Public Works Department. The area that I specifically oversee is what they call drainage and development. So I kind of manage the storm sewer system as well as the sanitary sewer system. So just to give you a little background about myself. And we talk about Urbana's 2 sewer systems. We are fortunate as a community. We actually have what they call a separate storm and sanitary sewer system. Some of the larger communities, for example, St. Louis, Chicago, Indianapolis, have what they call combined sewer systems for portions of their developed area. And in a combined sewer, both the stormwater and sanitary waste are commingled. Typically for dry weather flows, all that flow is diverted into the treatment plant. But when you get wet weather events, rainfall events, then a portion of that commingled waste ends up being discharged directly to the local creeks and waterways. With a separate storm sewer system, just the storm water is routed through the pipes and goes directly to the creek, so the pollution is much less than in a combined sewer system. So we're very fortunate to have it. As you can see with this graphic, our storm sewer system is about 144 miles of pipe, which is pretty significant. Compared to 103 miles of pipe for the sanitary sewer system. We've got over 8,000 inlets and manholes. Those are a lot of times the rectangular grates you see in the street, or the circular casting covers you see out in the street, compared to the sanitary sewer system, which only has a little over 2,000 manholes. The difference in the numbers are primarily because with the storm sewer system, we've got to have a way to get the water off the streets, off the properties into the pipes, and that's what those manhole and inlets accomplish. So that's why we have a lot more of them. Our idea isn't to bring surface water, runoff into the sanitary sewer system, so we don't have to have as many structures. Pipe size, you can see for the storm sewer system, it can be quite massive. I mean, we have some 6-inch lines, which are for like people's sump pumps and downspouts primarily, all the way up to 120 inches in diameter. And actually, if you count like the Boneyard Creek, I mean, we have some fairly massive drainage infrastructure. The sanitary sewer pipe is kind of limited. Most, I'd say 95% of the sanitary sewer system is 8-inch pipe. We have a little bit of, 5 and 6-inch pipe and a little bit of 10, 12, and 15-inch pipe, but most of it's 8. You can see the value, and this is one thing I always stress to people: the amount of money we have invested in our underground infrastructure. You figure about $1 million a mile of replacement cost in developed, built-out areas. So, the cost to replace the sanitary sewer system in total would be $103 million. The cost to replace the storm sewer system would be, $144 million. So we've almost got $250 million tied up in our underground infrastructure. So it is a significant asset to the city. For funding sources, they're both, funded on fees. We have a sewer benefit fee or tax that's assessed by the sanitary district and collected by the sanitary district that we use to fund our sanitary sewer infrastructure. And recently, back in 2013, we adopted a stormwater utility fee, which charges property owners based on the amount of impervious area. For a single-family residential, we charge a flat fee, so we don't actually compute the impervious area for single-family residential. But all other properties, we actually measure the amount of impervious area off of aerial photography, and they're charged based on the amount of impervious area, which is directly related to the stormwater runoff they create. So you can see budget-wise, we do spend a significant amount of money on both systems. I can tell you before the stormwater utility system, we were only spending about $800,000 a year on our storm sewer system, compared to the sanitary sewer system, which has been pretty evenly funded, over the last 2 decades at about 1.4 million. So in a way, we're still playing a little bit of catch up on the storm sewer because we had underfunded it for so many years, but the stormwater utility fee is really helping us get caught up. So this is a map of the storm sewer system in Urbana. You can see it is, fairly widespread. Point out a little difference between the sanitary and storm sewer system is most of the storm sewer system is located in the street. Really the streets almost function as part of the drainage system. They help convey the water via the curb pan or the pavement itself, and to collect it and get it into the pipes. We do have some storm sewers in backyards and side yards, but the vast majority of that infrastructure is located out in the streets. And another difference between the sanitary and storm sewer system is the sanitary system only has one discharge point, which is the Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District plant over on University Avenue, whereas the storm sewer has kind of multiple discharge points. Obviously, the Boneyard Creek and the saline is the primary drainage outlet for Urbana, but we also do have a portion down here in southeast Urbana that drains to the St. Joe ditch, as well as a portion of I would say, south central or southwest Urbana that drains down to the McCullough Creek, down by Meadowbrook Park. So the storm sewer is actually discharged to a couple of different outlets throughout town, sanitary just to one. So when we talk about the stormwater management program, there's kind of 2 major components of it. There's what we call quantity-based, and then there's quality-based. And quantity-based is primarily concerned with volume and flow rates. So when you think of flooding events, you're thinking of quantity. So some of our stormwater program activities are focused on dealing with the quantity of stormwater or the traditional flooding. This is what they're dealing with down in North Carolina and Florida and Georgia, where you get a lot of rain in a relatively short period of time. So some of the things we do to help with that is storm sewer pipe, manhole, and inlet repair. We want to keep the system functioning. If pipes collapse or become plugged, they won't drain properly. We do ditch grading and mowing. Ditches aren't maintenance free. They fill in over time. You get trees growing in them if you don't regularly control the maintenance. We do have one stormwater pump station in town, which is the Vine Street Viaduct, so we have to keep that operational to help with flooding issues associated with the viaduct. We do storm sewer pipe, manhole, and inlet cleaning, and this helps with the capacity or the quantity side. It also helps with the quality side that we're going to talk about in a minute, as far as getting the pollutants out of the system before they're washed out to the creek. We also inspect our local waterways. I've got noted here the Boneyard Creek, but we also inspect the saline, the McCullough, and the St. Joe, looking for any issues, anything from channel bank erosion to illegal discharges. We have pipes that come into these drainage channels, so we check to make sure there's nothing coming out of those pipes that shouldn't be, no sanitary waste, no illegal chemicals. So that's something that we're looking for. Regional detention facility maintenance. We do have 2 regional detention facilities, stormwater detention ponds in Urbana. One is over behind the Walmart, over off of High Cross Road, and the other is up off of North Lincoln Avenue, off of Kenyon Road, over by, I'm trying to think what the new hotel name is there, over where the old Holiday Inn Hotel was. And those are our 2 regional ones, so we have to take care of maintenance activities on those to ensure they continue to function. We do have a program for hazardous sump pump discharges in the winter. Sometimes you'll notice people that have sump pumps that aren't connected to storm sewers will discharge at the edge of their property, flow across the sidewalk, or flow onto the street pavement and create icing issues. So we have a program to help eliminate those. We respond to citizen and drainage concerns. Those are primarily weather related. So if there's a big rainfall and you have some flooding in your street, your yard, you get a backup in your basement, you can call the city and we'll have staff that come over and investigate it and see if there's anything we, the city, can do to alleviate the problem. And we also do stormwater management plan development reviews. So anytime a new development that comes in to Urbana, we review it to see if they have to provide stormwater detention. There's some requirements in the city's development ordinance that for certain size properties with certain amount of impervious area, they have to provide detention. And we also do floodplain regulation and management. We do have floodplain maps that were generated by FEMA for the city, and one of the things we work with is on new development to make sure that there's no structures located within the floodplain. Obviously, the best way to mitigate flood damages is to keep, structures out of those floodplains and floodways. So these are just some pictures kind of demonstrating the different things that we do on the quantity side. So I had mentioned storm sewer repairs, and I'll encourage you, you can count all the OSHA violations that are occurring in that particular picture. This is the Vine Street Viaduct pump station that we talked about. This was a particularly heavy rain event. So you can see kind of where my arrow is over here. There's actually a concrete channel that goes back towards the Boneyard Creek, and you see in this particular day it was pumping so much water that it was actually flooding out the channel. We do storm sewer cleaning and televising. We used to have our own crews do it. With the adoption of the stormwater utility fee, we actually contract this out. In fact, today we opened bids on our storm sewer cleaning and televising work for this year, and are going to go ahead and award that. We do the creek inspections. This is a picture of a former engineering technician for me that when we were doing an inspection of the Boneyard Creek, you see we put on waders to do the Boneyard Creek. We'll actually take canoes or kayaks to do the sailing inspection. It gets deep enough there where it isn't practical to walk it. This is at Goodwin Avenue Detention Basin. So typically at least once or twice a year we go out and inspect the detention basins, and we also mow them. And if there's any issues with those around the inlets or outlets or bank stabilization, we take care of those. This is what I was talking about with the hazardous sump pump discharges. So in the winter, if we get reported to us icing issues on the street or sidewalks, we'll come out, investigate those, determine if they're related to a sump pump, and then try to work with the property owners to mitigate those. As I mentioned too, if you have a flooding issue in the street, your backyard or your basement, we will come out and take a look at that and figure out what's causing it and what can be done to help eliminate it. Then the next thing I like to talk about is kind of our quality related activities. So this has to do with water quality. So this is kind of pollution. And typically I mentioned for the quantity related, those are big rainfall events. A 100-year flood event might be 7-8 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. The pollution is just the opposite. It's the smaller rainfall events that actually generate the most pollution. There's a phenomena called first flush. So when you think about it, anything deposited on the ground basically becomes a pollution source. Anything that runs off your car or fertilizers that you put on your lawn, if you get a rain event, that stuff can wash off into the storm sewer system and end up in the creek. So the thing that washes off the most pollution is kind of that first inch of rainfall. or fraction of an inch of rainfall, so that first rainfall falls, it washes the stuff off the surface. Once the surface is clear, there's not a lot more pollution coming. So most of the pollution is from the smaller storms. So our activities focus on that, on the quality side of it, rather than the big rainfall events like we do on the quantity side. So the big driver on our quality is our NPDES permit program. We're an MS4 community, which is a municipal separate storm sewer system, which is a mouthful of an acronym. But we have a permit with the state, and as part of that permit, we have a 5-year stormwater quality plan, and we have to have what they call best management practices. There's kind of 6 categories of those, and then within those 6 categories, we have to have activities to address water quality measures within those. So I think for this past year, we had something like 42 or 44 activities that we had to track and report to the state. And every year we have an annual report that we have to send to the state to document that we've met our goals for the year as far as our activities. So to go through real quick just what some of the things or activities that we do, we have a public education, public involvement component, erosion control. So any land disturbance activity in Urbana over 2,000 square feet, you have to get an erosion control permit. And we require certain measures to be in place while that construction is going on. And if they're not, there's an inspector that enforces to make sure that that those measures are done and done properly. We have post-development stormwater management, which gets down into making sure whatever detention basins and stuff that were installed as part of these subdivision developments continue to function. So we have to go out and inspect all the privately owned detention basins and contact the owners of those if there's maintenance issues with those. Eventually, we anticipate that some of the green infrastructure might become part of that post-development stormwater management program too. Obviously, the green infrastructure the city has installed is something that we have to monitor and maintain as we move forward. But it could be at some point in the future that as part of development that green infrastructure would be required by the city and would fall under that post-development stormwater management best management practice as well. There's some internal stuff that we do, and Scott's really heavily involved with this too, is you call them best practices or good housekeeping at our facilities. So for example, we wash our trucks inside so that the runoff from washing the trucks doesn't end up in the storm sewer system. It ends up in the sanitary sewer system. We dispose of our used motor oil properly. We don't dump it down the drain. So there are things that we do internally within Public Works in the city to minimize our pollution sources. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we're always looking for illicit discharges. Our own crews, when they're out doing sewer cleaning or road maintenance, are looking for illegal discharges. We also have phone numbers and emails available that people can report illicit discharges, and we'll inspect those. And I mentioned we're out in the creeks looking for them as well. And I guess I'll take a little break here, and just to show you as we talk about the MS4 program, we do keep all our stuff on the website. So if you ever want to see how we're performing with our MS4, our stormwater quality program, if you go to the City of Urbana webpage, Government, Public Works, Engineering, there's a stormwater system, and you can see we've got our annual report on here for the last 5 years. There's also a copy of our current permit, but you're always welcome to pull that up. This is the latest report. So you can see this is actually the report that we turn into IEPA. And it goes through a little bit of narrative, and those are the 6 measures we have there: public education outreach, public participation and involvement, illicit discharge, detection and elimination, construction site runoff, post-construction runoff, and pollution prevention and good housekeeping. And then we go through in detail, and that's what these tables are. I won't go through them with you because that could take all night. We go through and document how we specifically had goals for each one of those 6 measures, and then what we did to show that we accomplished those goals in that given year. So Like I said, as a new permit requirement, we have to post the last 5 years of those. So those are available to the public at any time to look at. These are just some pictures showing. So for public education, one of the things we love to do is go around to the classrooms and talk to the kids about stormwater and water quality. Kids seem to be really into that. This was over at the Urbana Middle School. Public participation, we love to sponsor cleanup events. Boneyard Creek Community Day is a big event that we participate in. I have 2 staff members that are heavily involved in setting that up and coordinating with the volunteers to do different cleanup activities along the Boneyard Creek. I mentioned our erosion control program. This is something that I've noticed in my tenure at the city that has really helped. When I started here, we had tons of complaints about mud tracking on the streets, particularly new subdivisions, and those complaints have really gone down almost to nothing at this point because we are so on top of it. They have to get a permit, and I have an inspector that goes out once a week, and she's really sharp, and she's really on the contractors. If there's any mud track, they usually get it cleaned up by the end of the day. So we've made great strides with the erosion control program. I remember when we started that you'd see the silt fence flapping in the wind because they wouldn't trench it in. You'd see them put the silt fabric under the inlet grates, and then you'd see a day later them come by and poke holes in it as soon as the first rainstorm came. So, we continue to have some areas that we'd like to improve. Right now we're really focusing on concrete washout. So when the concrete truck comes and delivers a load of concrete for sidewalks, driveways, foundations, they have to wash the chute out before the truck returns. Well, in the past, they've just liked to dump that in the storm sewer, which is an incredibly bad source of pollution for the local waterways. So we've been working and requiring them to dispose of that properly, which they actually put in a separate container and allow that waste to evaporate until it hardens up and then dispose of it in a sanitary landfill. Street sweeping is an activity that we actually pay out of the stormwater fund. So you might think of that as being street related, but it actually gets that dirt and material, garbage, trash off the street so it doesn't end up in the storm sewer system and ultimately in our local creeks and waterways. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the Stormwater Utility Fund history. I mean, this was really instrumental in helping our stormwater program. Previously, the stormwater activities were all funded out of the general fund, which there's a lot of competition, whether it's for the police department or library. There's a lot of demands on the general fund, so it was always a challenge to get the proper funding for the stormwater system. So back in 2009, we made some presentations to council. In 2010, we were able to get a consultant on board to look at the feasibility of doing a stormwater utility. We ended up having AMEC as a consultant, and they had experience with doing hundreds of stormwater utilities. The other thing that helped us too was the city of Champaign was going through the same process and evaluation at the same time, so we kind of jointly adopted a stormwater utility fee together. As part of the feasibility study, we formed a stormwater advisory committee that had local stakeholders. So we had people from the business world, people from environmental, representing different environmental groups, different ratepayers. We had people that were just single-family residential property owners, representatives from the park district, school district, county, all involved with providing input as far as, if a stormwater utility fee was the appropriate thing to do and how it would be structured and what its priorities would be. So that was a very beneficial process to go through. You see, in September 2011, we started meeting with the key ratepayers in advance of going to council to let them know why we were doing this, why it was necessary, and to let them know what the financial impact would be on them if a stormwater utility fee was adopted. So there were no surprises.
Hey, Brad.
Yeah.
Who are the key ratepayers?
Well, those were generally the largest ratepayers.
Like the university and...
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I think the university might be the single largest ratepayer that there
sure.
was. Some of the other big, ratepayers were, at the time it was Provena, but, Carl, the Park District, the county, the school district. At the time, I think it was Solo Cup, but now it's Dart, some of the big industries. So, we went through as part of the feasibility studies and had identified, based on impervious area, who would be the largest, payers, and we met with each one of them to go over, what their bill essentially would be.
Thank you.
I think O'Brien at the time was another one that was in the top 25. And then you can see in 2011, we presented the feasibility study to council. They were very supportive of it and approved it. And then in 2012, we moved into what they call the implementation phase, which was actually coming up with the billing system, adopting the credit and incentive programs. As you can see in April 17th, 2012, Champaign adopted their stormwater utility fee. And then on May 7th, 2012, we, the city of Urbana, adopted the stormwater utility fee. And along with that, we had selected the sanitary district to be the billing entity. So the stormwater utility fee is actually collected as part of the sanitary sewer bill. And you can see there was a period of time where we were preparing the bills and doing the public outreach kind of between 2012 to 2013. Finalizing the credit of incentive manual, and then the first bills went out in September 2013. And we currently collect about $1.5 million as part of the stormwater utility fee. So like I said, it did allow us to significantly increase our spending for the stormwater utility fee. So how do we spend our money for the stormwater utility fee? This is just kind of a quick pie chart to show you kind of roughly how it's broken down. But you can see most of it goes in for capital improvements and O&M. About 76% of the money goes kind of directly back into the infrastructure. You can see there are some personnel expenses we pay out of it for admin and finance. You can see there is some water quality and NPDES compliance component of it too. But really the bulk of the money goes back into the infrastructure, either through cleaning or maintenance programs or through repair, rehab programs. Like I mentioned, we do have a credit and incentive program. What this table shows you is what that is. For single family and duplex properties, they only have an incentive option. If you're a non-single family residential property, you can pick either the incentives or you can go with credits. The incentives are kind of a cash-based reimbursement program where you get money back for doing certain green infrastructure related items, whereas a credit is actually a reduction in the amount of your stormwater utility fee. So you can see the different ones we've had. And then by far our most popular, which I misspelled popular, I apologize for that, incentive is the rain barrel. So Scott helps put together an annual sale that we have each year, and by far this is the biggest incentive we give out. We currently give out a $25 rebate on every rain barrel that is purchased, and it's usually a significant number that we give out in a given year, mostly related to the event that Scott arranges. And then on the green infrastructure side, we haven't had a huge amount of participation on that. I do have a couple slides I want to show you of green infrastructure that the city has incorporated into its project. So this was Broadway Avenue. This is part of the Boneyard Creek Improvement Project. And this is a bioswale along Broadway Avenue. And you can see kind of over here where my arrow is, we've depressed a portion of the curb here, and the water off the street can actually come into this bioswale, which is a depressed area with an engineered soil in it and plantings, and basically soak into the ground, and hopefully we take up some of that storm water as well as the pollution through the plants that are planted in there. Are you talking about the casting here? Yes. Yeah, that is, and I think that actually it allows it to function too. If it's a heavy enough rain, it'll actually back up out of the storm sewer as well. But it would also function as an outlet when the water levels came down. So that's an example. We do have, on a couple of our parking lots around town, we've installed these. They function well. We haven't had any issues with them. Probably the one challenge with them is maintenance. They do require, maintenance similar to keeping any, perennial landscaped area. You do have to come in and weed them and refresh the mulch and occasionally replace the plants. And then this is over at parking lot 25. This was some pervious pavement that we installed. Probably the biggest area of pervious pavement in Urbana is over at the Mass Transit District. But for this city parking lot, it's what they call an inverse crown. So rather than the road or the parking lot being high in the middle and draining out towards the edges, it's actually high out at the edges and drains to the middle. So we ran this pervious pavement, in the middle where all the water drained to. The water is able to infiltrate in between the spaces between the bricks there, and there's 12 to 15 inches of stone rock underneath of it where that water can percolate and infiltrate through. And within that stone bed, there is an under drain that connects it to the storm sewer system, but that water does have an opportunity to infiltrate down and recharge the groundwater. And then Scott mentioned you want to talk a little bit about climate change and how that impacts the storm sewer system. So really the way I think of climate change impacting the storm sewer system is primarily on the design of the storm sewer system. So I want to give you a little background information on how the storm sewer system is designed. And these are actually requirements, for any new development or construction in Urbana. This is how we size and determine, what the diameter of the pipes are, for a storm sewer system, or how big the detention basins are. So currently, we require the storm sewers to be designed for a 5-year post-development storm. What we mean by post-development is, after the final build-out. So if it's a green grassed field and they're going to build a Walmart on it, the storm sewer system is designed to take all the runoff, from the paved surfaces, the roof surfaces from that Walmart. And then when we talk about design storms, what we're looking at is they all come from the Illinois Bulletin 70, which you can go in and look up for a particular recurrence interval. So they talk about them in years of storms. So you might have a 1-year storm, a 2-year storm, a 5-year storm, a 10-year storm, a 25-year storm, 50-year storm, or a 100-year storm. And what these are based on is taking weather data and running a statistical regression and being able to calculate what the probability. So a 100-year storm really is a 1% chance storm. A 5-year storm is a 20% chance storm. You could have, the 100-year storm is kind of a misnomer. You could have 2 100-year back-to-back storms. It's just there's a 1% probability of it occurring in a given year is probably the best way to think of it. So that's how the storm sewer system is designed. Detention facilities are designed to store the difference between the 50-year post-development storm and the 5-year pre-development storm. So you think back to my Walmart example. So you have to design the detention basin, take all the water coming from a 50-year rainfall event, which might be 5 inches in 24 hours, and so all that water comes into your detention basin, and then you're only allowed to discharge at the 5-year pre-development storm, which might be a 2 or 3 inches over 24 hours. So you have to store that difference between the kind of the throttled rate coming out and the heavy rate coming in. So, that's kind of quite simply how the storm sewer system is sized. So it's really all based on the design storm. And like I said, the design storm is based off of historical rainfall data. You hear on the financial commercials, past performance doesn't, indicate future results. In the engineering world, it's just the opposite. We base everything on past results or past data, and we use that to forecast what the future results are. So that's one of the challenges with with climate change is, all our storms are based on historical data. So if there is a fundamental change or shift in the climate, our design storms might not be accurate. If there's an increase or decrease in the rainfall intensity, that would potentially have an impact, and our pipes might not have enough capacity to deal with the storms. So,
could you go back to that slide and can you give us just a little terminology on the 50-year post-development storm and the 5-year pre-development storm? And just let us know what those are meaning.
Well, the 50-year post-development storm, so you'd be looking at, as I mentioned, a 100-year storm is equivalent to a 1% probability storm. So you're looking at, a rainfall event that would have a 2% chance of occurrence in a given year. So, you're probably looking at like a 4 or 5 inch rainfall in 24-hour type of storm. And that would be for the post-development conditions. So you're looking at kind of what the built-out conditions are. The 5-year pre-development storm, that's that 20% occurrence, type storm. And, that would be for pre-development. So that'd be for what it's, cornfield or, natural grass, type condition would be. And then, like I said, so, the big thing with climate change is, how do you predict, what the new design storm is going to be? And it hasn't been that people have been sticking their head in the sand over this. There has been some movement. And I offer this graphic as an example of some of the studies that are starting to go in it. We still use, the Bulletin 70, and pretty much every municipality in the city or in the state of Illinois uses this. This is the Illinois climatological data. Now, different cities have different requirements. Like, for example, we use the 50-year design storm for our detention. Champaign uses 100. There's some communities that might size their storm sewer pipes for a 10-year storm. There might be some that's, design them for a 2-year storm. But pretty much everybody uses, this Bulletin 70 for figuring out what the design storm is, which tells you how much, rainfall that you're getting. But, one of the things they're looking at is, this data dates back to 1989 is when this was studied. So the federal government went out and did a study and published some results in 2004. So, the federal study, which is the Atlas 14 data, included, additional, rainfall data from 1989 to 2004. And you can see they compared that against, the same design storms that Bulletin 70 predicted. And you can see the results are kind of really inconclusive. You can see in the brown areas are areas where the Atlas data was actually had actually underpredicted the rainfall events, or I guess it would be overpredicted, where they're saying that it was between 1 to 2 inches less than what would have been predicted with the Bulletin 70 data. And just the opposite in some of the other places. You can see, unfortunately, we are right in one of the areas where it was off, half an inch to an inch, where if you use the Bulletin 70 data, the Atlas 14 data would have, I'm sorry, if you would have used the Atlas 14 data, it would have predicted, up to a half inch to an inch less than what the Bulletin 70 did. So, unfortunately right now, no one's really sure what the exact effect of the climate change is going to be, but you can see just based on adding those additional data years, it shifted some of the rainfall amounts.
I'm a little confused about what's the baseline in this. So is Bulletin 70 have a lower or a higher number in Champaign County than Atlas 14?
I think it is that Atlas 14 had a higher in Champaign County.
Okay.
So, that's indicating, for the rest of the state, those additional years of weather data would have indicated drier conditions and would have had a lower design storm. But specifically here in the Champaign County area, the opposite would be true. You know, we would want actually a greater design storm. So, and one of the things that the city's been trying to be proactive about that too. And, you know, we have some contacts with the USGS and the state climatologist office. And one of the things I know we did, I think it was in February 2015, was, you know, we did make a written request to the state climatologist, who's Jim Angel, and asked them to look into this, and, you know, spoke about our concerns with climate change and how it would. So, like I said, as to date, they haven't revised it, but I do believe there is starting to be some research and movement towards going in and looking at possibly making revisions or changes to that to reflect climate change. Like I said, this map that I'm showing you here actually came from an article by Jim Angel, who's the state climatologist, that, you know, was a comparison, the article's entitled "A Comparison Between Bulletin 70 and NOAA Atlas 14 for Illinois." So they are starting to do some research, and we'll have to see. But, you know, like I said, obviously the big thing with storm sewer sizing is you have to pick a design storm. And like I said, traditionally it's been based off of historic weather data, but that might not be a good indication of, you know, what future climate change holds for us. So with that, that kind of ends my presentation. I'll open it up to questions.
Other questions for Brad?
I have questions.
Sure.
Thank you for your talk. I
Oh, no
love this
problem.
topic. This is really cool stuff. I guess my first question is relates to Illinois American Water. Wait, let me get this right. No, not Illinois American Water. The operator of our sanitary treatment facility. What's that called?
UCSD, the Urbana-Champaign
UCSD.
Sanitary.
Thank you. Its name flew out of my head. So, how much of our sanitary pipes are ours versus theirs? Like, who in the city? All the pipes are the city's, the utility, or which are their pipes? Which are our pipes?
Yeah, I'd be glad to explain. That's
All right,
actually a very
thanks.
good question. So the way it works, and the same is true for Champaign and Savoy, is the sanitary district owns the treatment plants, the pump stations, the force mains, and then what they call the interceptor sewers, which are, you know, typically the large diameter sewers. The cities own what they call the collector sewers. So those are the sewers that typically run down the street and that the individual houses are connected to. So if you want to kind of think of the difference between an interceptor sewer and a collector sewer, you know, the interceptor sewers don't have houses individually tied into them. The collector sewers do, and then the collector sewers feed into the interceptors. So, you know, like pipe footage, we actually own probably a lot more pipe footage than what the sanitary district does, because they only kind of run trunk lines that all our lines feed into.
Okay, but they do have, those lines do traverse the city. They're under some of the streets.
They do, and generally they
connect.
follow the low areas. So there's 2 or 3 interceptors that, you know, like run along the Boneyard Creek. So, you know, they kind of follow the low drainage points in the city.
Okay. So you may not know this, and I know very little about it, so if I'm not formulating the question right or it's too complicated to speak to, you can take a pass. But the sanitary district made like a water sale to a fertilizer treatment plant. And
Cronus.
yeah, so if I understand, and I actually don't even know if that's on schedule or moving forward as planned or not, I assume it is, but less water was going to end up in, you know, northeast Urbana and discharging that way, and more was going to find its way south of town for pumping and delivery south. Has that change in flow and infrastructure affected your operations positively or negatively? I mean, or the overall stormwater flow situation in terms of the volumes you'd expect in stormwater? Probably not. Stormwater is separate.
Yeah, well, you're correct. It would not have any impact on stormwater. On the sanitary sewer side, it's a little too early to determine the impact on us, because they're just in the process of completing construction of the pump station that'll actually pump a lot of that water from Champaign that actually traveled through Urbana on its way to the treatment plant. So we really haven't had a long period of time to kind of assess. We're hopeful that by diverting that water to southeast Urbana will actually help with some of our interceptor capacity here in Urbana. We have had some issues in the past, particularly along like Crystal Lake Drive with sanitary sewer overflows. So we're hopeful that this would reduce the amount of water running through those pipes and reduce the possibility of any sanitary sewer overflows. So it should help, but we haven't had a really good test of it yet.
And a similar question, how much water in our pipes originates in Champaign? Like, does the storm systems intertie with Champaign just at all by the nature of a watershed, or is it really separate? Like,
Well, they're really separate, and that's a really good question. And, for the sanitary sewer system, we are tied directly in with Champaign, and their water, most of their water actually moves, through Urbana on the way to the treatment plant there. But the storm sewer systems, because those discharge to local waterways, we in fact don't share any really common. I mean, I guess you could say the Boneyard Creek is a shared facility because water from Champaign moves through the Boneyard Creek on its way to the saline. But as far as underground infrastructure, no, there's no interconnections, and we really operate separate systems.
can I just keep going? I'll be done soon. Yeah, okay. It's a great topic. I love this. Do you track impervious area as a metric? I mean, I assume you do if the way the utility fees work and everything. So if that, I'm sort of interested in that as a performance metric over time. Is that something we track, Scott, as a sustainability? No, but we could look at it. You look at it. I'm kind of curious what our number is, if it compares, if you consider it a good ratio or mix. Is it average for a city of our size, and is it changing over time in general?
Yeah, I mean, we could come up with it. We actually have an impervious surface GIS layer, so that's something that we can come up with. It probably doesn't go down over time. It probably only increases over time because anytime there's new construction. And I guess the one thing I would caution is we don't have impervious surface area for single-family residential properties because we just do a flat rate on those. So we could give you a number, but it would be excluding single-family residential. But it would give you an idea. And I think you'd be shocked at what a large number it is, because I know even for the stormwater utility fees, when we met with some of the large ratepayers, I mean the hundreds of thousands of square feet of impervious area is quite surprising. You don't think you have that much, but I mean for a single family residential, we estimated just for a single family residential lot in Urbana, it averaged about 3,100 square feet. So there's a lot of impervious area out there.
It's also a problematic metric in that if you think about one city has X percent that's impervious, a high number might be good. If you think about Manhattan, their impervious per capita is quite low, even though their total impervious is quite high, right? They don't have a lot of green space.
Oh, yeah.
But their per capita impervious would be quite low.
Right. I'm not sure.
So what's good and what's bad?
Yeah, I'm not sure I would do it per capita, but I guess I guess you could see both. You could see both in terms of intensity, use intensity. All right. Well, my last question is also probably too big, but it's fresh on everyone's mind what's happening with the recent hurricane in the southeast and just spectacular, exceeding the floods of record. I mean, these watersheds that are hey, flood record was 17, we're at 24 right now. Wow. Has 14 inches of rain ever fallen on Urbana? Do you know what the biggest rain we've had is?
I mean, I would say in the time that I've been here, 6 or 7 inches over 24 hours. That's a hard thing with rainfall events is there's two types of storms that create flooding. There's, a lot of rain over a fairly long period of time, 24 hours or 48 hours or 96 hours. But sometimes if you get 1.5 inches of rain in 10 minutes, that can give you just as bad as flooding as 8 inches over 24 hours.
Right.
So,
right.
In fact, I think a lot of times the summer thunderstorms that come and dump, 2 inches in 20 minutes create more flooding issues, than some of the larger rainfall events spread over more time.
Okay. But I'm just curious, as an exercise or anything, have you guys ever taken a what if? I'm just curious. I've seen historic photos of flooding, and I know there's been changes too over time that have improved our ability to move water, out of certain neighborhoods and things like that. But
well, I'll point out we're very fortunate both in Champaign and Urbana that we're literally at the top of the watershed.
right.
So when you think about it,
Water flows in every direction
away from us. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think that probably has more to do, with the lack of flooding that we have. I mean, I'd love to take credit for our infrastructure eliminating all the drainage issues and stuff, but I mean, really, when it gets down to it, I think a lot of it is we're just fortunate that we're kind of at the top of the watershed. The lower you get in the watershed, the more problematic it becomes.
Okay.
And I'll point out too, I guess one of the things, we adopted stormwater detention, back in the 80s, and I think that has made a huge difference. For all the development that's come in, since then they've put in stormwater detention, and we don't see the flooding issues in the areas that have been built out since the stormwater detention requirements were adopted that we see in, some of the older historic areas that don't have that. So, I mean, I think that's made a huge difference, with the flooding side of it.
All right, thanks.
So yeah, I really like the presentation too, and I think it's
Thank
really
you.
interesting. So that's why I have a number of questions. I guess just kind of thinking about, you talked about some of the design standards, like 5-year and 50-year for the detention facilities and stormwater systems. So if we think of the whole municipal limit of Urbana as a detention facility or stormwater, a stormwater system, where do we stand relative to that, the design standard? Are we living up to the, just as community? Maybe it's difficult, but you get where I'm going with that.
Yeah, and I mean the answer is it really varies geographically.
Depends where you are.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you go to the newer subdivisions, Stone Creek, Behringer Commons, I mean those are all designed to the current standards, which is the 5-year design storm for the storm sewer and the 50-year, for the detention facilities. There's actually some areas of the older part of town where they, put in the big brick arch sewers, or there were large storm sewers that were kind of retrofitted into those areas because of drainage issues, where they probably have more than a 5-year, storm capacity in those areas. But I know we have other areas of town that might only have a 1 or a 2-year storm sewer capacity. So it all is dependent upon, what size of pipe was sized. And I mean, I know we are aware of areas where we do have undersized pipes that in the future we'd like to increase those, or, supplement, the drainage issues with maybe some green infrastructure. But the, kind of the challenge with green infrastructure is it doesn't really help you very much on the quantity side. It's more of a quality. It works better with the quality side of it.
What do you see of the current major challenges in terms of quantity and quality?
Well, I mean, I think just the tightening standards, trying to be able to do both. In the past, we've really only focused on quantity,
Right.
With basically putting it in a pipe and conveying it away as fast as possible. Whereas we started doing, kind of in the late 80s, early 90s, putting in the stormwater detention. The green infrastructure is going to be new for us. It'll help improve the quality of our water, but it's going to be additional facilities that we have to maintain and a different type of maintenance. How we maintain the pipes with our cleaning activities is a lot different than, having to have the landscaping and horticultural knowledge to maintain a bioswale or a rain garden. Even the pervious pavements, you have to maintain those differently than you would a traditional concrete or asphalt pavement. There's different type of sweeping methods. You have to be careful about land disturbance activities around them so you don't bind them up, with dirt and stuff. So I think, the transition into more green infrastructure is probably the next big, movement, for our stormwater program.
Is it a learning curve kind of thing? I mean, you talked about it addresses quality. It doesn't address quantity as much as, say, the traditional infrastructure, but there's a learning curve thing.
Yeah, and that's where I think some of the projects that we've done have been very beneficial in giving us some hands-on experience. And I mean, we've learned a lot. In fact, I could tell you on a couple of the bioswales, we've gone back and redone the vegetation or kind of rebuilt it because our first plan of action didn't really turn out like what we were hoping for. So, we're always evaluating, what we have out there and, trying to come up with the lowest maintenance but best looking facility that we could have.
Right. Do we have a good way of, and maybe you're collecting that data right now, but do we have a good way of comparing cost of installation, say amortized over whatever the design life is, and cost of maintenance and operations for a traditional infrastructure versus a green infrastructure? Do we have any ways of comparing those things?
We don't have a lot of data of ourselves because we unfortunately don't have a lot of green infrastructure in place right now. There are some communities that have more data, and there's starting to be more published about it. So we're kind of looking, out there academically what's being done and keeping track of it. I mean, a great example is, we just had a green infrastructure conference over at the I Hotel, and there's some great presentations as part of that, and we'll continue to support that and foster that, because really it's kind of that sharing of knowledge and finding those things out that really help. But yeah, we don't have a lot of data, and most of the green infrastructure in Urbana is stuff that's installed by the city. We'd really like to start seeing more developers incorporate that in to their projects as well, because it's great for the city to do, but in order for it to grow, we really need other people to start adopting it as well.
What do you think are some of the barriers in the private folks adopting those? Is it kind of like with the city, just an awareness? It's a different kind of thing.
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, it's hard because it's new. It's different than from what most developers are used to.
Mm-hmm.
The maintenance is another potential issue. Like I said, it's potentially different than mowing turfed areas. There's more of a landscape horticultural component of it. If you're going to incorporate native plants into it, you have to know the difference between a weed and a native plant,
right,
in order for those to be successful. Not everybody has access to staff that has that ability.
Mm-hmm. So I wasn't able to get to that conference, but I guess I'm kind of wondering about if there's thoughts on promising or effective business models, or what are or how to overcome some of those barriers for getting it over into the private sector. Because if that, it's sounding from you, it's kind of sounding like, well, that's an opportunity space for making it more diffused throughout Urbana and lots of other places too. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder if there's any activity or guidance along those lines.
Yeah, we're actively researching that. Unfortunately, at this point in time, I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
Be honest, before the city adopted the ordinance requiring stormwater detention, you didn't see many developers voluntarily putting in stormwater detention. So I don't know if something similar would happen on the green infrastructure water quality side. But,
I see.
But yeah, we try to encourage, but right now we don't require.
Mm-hmm.
But we would love to have some more developers adopt green infrastructure.
So, like a couple of those examples, like the bioswales. There's not many of those around town, but they just, it just seems like a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like that one and the pervious pavement. Do you have thoughts on, some of the, some great spots for next efforts, or any kind of places where you look and say, yeah, we ought to, do these places because they're great for whatever reasons?
Yeah, we'd like to incorporate them as part of projects. So when we have specific projects come up, like the Winter Creek, that allows us to incorporate that into the overall construction project.
Okay.
We hate to kind of piecemeal them, so it's nice if you can kind of piggyback on another project to accomplish them.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess this could be, green infrastructure or just, plain old traditional stuff. Do we have any upcoming capital projects, major capital projects anticipated, or is that kind of just like in every year, doing the maintenance, repairing stuff?
Well, actually, the next step for the stormwater utility is, and I think it's in 2017 or 18, we're going to be doing a new stormwater management plan. Our last one was done back in the 80s, to give you an idea how outdated it is. But we're looking at, we've budgeted, I think, about 200 or 250,000, to have a consultant come in and do a thorough review of our stormwater infrastructure and our stormwater program, and then make some recommendations on a capital improvement program and identify some projects.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll be public outreach as part of that, as well as presenting and getting council on board with that. But we want to finish the stormwater management plan and get that done before we embark on any major capital improvement projects. But I can tell you, green infrastructure will be an important component of that stormwater management plan.
Okay. Well, that sounds great. I hope we have an opportunity to interact with that plan as,
I'm sure you
as
will.
things develop. Okay, that's great. On the stormwater incentives, there was just 3% on that pie, and I think you indicated there's just not a lot of people taking up on that. And maybe that was more along the lines of the conversation we were having just a second ago about not a lot of people implementing those projects. Is anything more along those lines?
Yeah, I mean you're absolutely correct. We haven't seen a huge participation in it other than the rain barrels.
Okay.
And that might be something that we look in the future of taking some of that money that was programmed, for the incentives. And if we're not getting a lot of public participation, maybe going out and just taking that money and doing some bioswales or pervious pavement, kind of retrofit projects around the city.
Right.
Where if we don't have the public use the money, we as the city will take the lead in doing those type of projects. And
Is there any room for, is it appropriate to consider, like, there's some accumulated pile of incentive funds, like an RFP, or some kind of, just throwing out an idea,
we'd be open to that, or maybe partnering with an environmental group to do a project.
Okay. On the this is going back to the NPDES permit.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have any any significant non-compliance events in our past couple of years of reports?
No, in fact, I think back in 2013 or 14, we were audited by IEPA. Our local IEPA representative is Holly Herchert out of the Champaign office here, and she came and did an audit and gave us an A+ on our efforts. There were, I think, only two things she identified that she wanted us to do, and both of them were fairly minor. One was they wanted us to do more surveying to find out what people's knowledge was of stormwater pollution, so that we could maybe better track our public education efforts to see if we were changing people's perception or knowledge of stormwater quality issues. And her other comment was to better report our volunteer cleanup activities. She wanted us to, do a better job of documenting, how many tons or cubic yards. We would report the events, but we typically wouldn't,
Okay.
Specifically identify how much material
Okay.
was removed as part of Boneyard Creek cleanup, or, the Urbana, Beautify Urbana projects, where they're picking up trash around town.
They didn't want to do a review without some kind of critique.
Yeah, they're always going to come up with one or two comments, but if that's
Okay.
all they had, we came out pretty well.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great.
One question. Is there any opportunity for reuse or gray water usage?
There is, but the challenge on that is the Illinois Plumbing Code. Definitely for irrigation purposes, you can use stormwater for that. And, I'll point to an example, for Boneyard Creek, we actually, for the irrigation water, pull it out of the Boneyard Creek, so we're not using Illinois American, potable water. And I also throw in from my own personal experience, I live on a detention pond, and I throw a hose in the lake, and I actually pump out of it to water some of my landscape. And so, I mean, when you get into gray water, which is kind of reusing sanitary water, like I said, the big hurdle is the Illinois Plumbing Code. But I mean, I think there are some exceptions, and there are ways you can, work with the plumbing code to do it. And I think there's a couple of examples in Urbana. I think there's one out in Behringer Commons where they might have some gray water recycling. But obviously the big concern with gray water recycling is you don't want to contaminate, the potable water. So I think there's some separate piping requirements and stuff that you have to do in conjunction with that. But yeah.
I know I already asked my questions. I got a goofy one that I forgot
Sure.
to ask you. So we have a lot of urban wildlife in Urbana, and if you ever walk at night, you see raccoons, you see skunks, you see a lot of animals apparently utilizing the stormwater system.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious if you had, is that a nuisance? Is that compatible? What are they doing down there? Like, is their use of it sort of transient, or are there like large numbers of raccoons in the system? Is that like part of what's going on with mammals and things in our system?
Well, I do think they use it as temporary shelter. We do find them, and a lot of times you can see from their excrement, that they're down there. We've never really had an issue. There's been a couple times where we actually caught one usually you don't catch them in there because usually, they're, long, they've, scattered or vamoosed long in advance of, our cleaning or televising equipment getting there. But there's a couple times where we've caught a raccoon in the pipe with our, camera, and usually the camera gets the worst end of it because those raccoons can get pretty mean. But no, we've never really had an issue with wildlife clogging a pipe, or we have had some concerns with like beavers over in Meadowbrook Park. We actually worked with the park district when the beavers were building their dam there. There were some concerns about it starting to back water up the pipe, but the park district was able to kind of put in a special pipe structure that only allowed the water level to get up to a certain level that was good for the beavers, but not going to create an issue with us for the storm sewer system. So, really, I think the only issue we ever had with the beaver was with a beaver population, and it was easily resolved.
Okay, thanks.
So you're not going to bust them for putting sanitary into the storm sewer system?
The beavers? No.
Or the raccoons?
Or the raccoons.
Any of the other ones down in there?
Yeah.
There you go. Are there any other questions or comments this evening?
Well, I guess I would like to make one final comment too. I'm up here talking to you, but it is by no means the engineering division that is the primary driver in stormwater. I mean, really, all parts of the city. Scott's group in environmental sustainability, play a very important role, as well as our operations guys being out there sweeping streets, to our arbor department. I mean, the maintenance of the trees that they do and planting of trees has a tremendous impact on our stormwater. So, it's no one department's effort. I mean, even for example, UPTV runs some stormwater quality videos for us to help try to educate the public. So, I mean, really, it's a citywide effort for our stormwater program. It's not just the engineering division and what it does. It's really a team effort that expands, multiple city departments.
Well, thank you very much
Thank you.
for coming in.
And if
you
you ever
have any
want me to
questions.
come back and talk about anything stormwater, sanitary, or even landfill related, I do some of the landfill stuff with the
great.
Urbana
Great.
abandoned landfills. I'd be glad to come back.
All right. We will very likely take advantage of that. Thank you. All right. Let's move to the staff report.
Good evening. Thank you, Brad. I really appreciate that. First up is updates on Climate Action Plan. Under Goal 1 Action 6, evaluate opportunities to retrofit existing outdoor lighting with more energy efficient lighting. Last night at Council, the Council approved, at Committee of the Whole actually, I'll still need to go to Council, Memorandum of Understanding which will see the university and the city partner on an LED retrofit on Springfield Avenue between Matthews and Lincoln Avenue. We're not going to be doing anything with the poles, but rather just replacing the lights. The existing lights are a metal halide. The quality of light is not very good, and the university came to the city asking if we could improve it. And so we've come up with a partnership where the city will do the installation, provide the labor, and the university will pay for the fixtures. So that's a small project. We have some other lighting improvements that will also see more higher energy use HID lights be replaced with LEDs as part of the normal capital improvement cycle. Probably next year some of those will happen, and we're also looking at what it would take to do a system-wide retrofit. So still pursuing both small and large projects on that.
Hey Scott, on the LED streetlights, there's a program. I think it's new this year through the Illinois Energy Now. There's a public sector in the Ameren Territory program for LED streetlight incentives, and hasn't been publicized really well yet, but it does exist. So it sounds like you know about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're getting support from Elevate Energy.
Yeah, they're the administrator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're helping us
Okay.
access
Good.
that.
You know about it then.
Yeah. So in this case, I think the incentive may go to the university since they're paying, the cash for the actual fixtures. But yeah, we're working on making sure we take advantage of that. On Goal 3, Action 4, proposed strategies to improve the local on-site energy market. As part of, I think I had mentioned we're working on this SolSmart designation. This is a DOE project to provide recognition for cities and inducement for cities to improve their local solar market and make it fast, easy, cheap to install solar on public, private, commercial, and residential buildings. We have, as part, one of the items in that menu of activities is to put some information on the city website, including, kind of a best practice or what is needed in order to install solar in the city. So we've created a new webpage on the city website that we're utilizing as a one-stop shop for everything that you would need to know to install solar. We're not putting up the names and phone numbers of installers that people should call and get quotes, but everything short of that. And the website is the city's website, urbanaillinois.us/solar. So we've got most of the information that we're intending to put up is already up, and a couple other things that we're working on. And we're moving towards getting a bronze level designation with SolSmart. They're providing some particular technical assistance for items that are specifically included in their menu of activities. Their ability to provide technical assistance to other related activities will loosen up if we can get a bronze or a silver level designation. So still working on that. Goal 4, Action 3, incorporate pollinator-supported plant species in city landscapes. On September 6th, the mayor read a proclamation declaring September 2016 Monarch Butterfly Month. The mayor is very committed to the National Wildlife Federation's Mayors for Monarchs pledges of activities. We've completed 8 of the 24 activities. We have a couple additional activities that are in there again, another menu of best practices in their list that are going to be completed in the spring. And I noticed that one of those activities was the Arbor Division had a garden planned for this property at the city building. They had planned a very attractive but conventional garden, not particularly addressing monarchs or pollinators. And with our participation in the Mayors for Monarchs program, the Arbor Division has redesigned that garden to incorporate pollinator and monarch-friendly or attractive or supportive species. And I saw recently that they've already tilled the portion of turf grass that's going to go in at the front of this property. So you can look for that to be planted next spring. Goal 5 Action 1, partner with existing energy efficiency programs and community groups. We had 5 households reported greenhouse gas emissions from our recent low-carbon diet teams. These were all from the Unitarian Church. They had a number of households, 2 different teams, meeting the standard 4 meetings to work through the low-carbon diet book and make their households and their lifestyles more energy efficient and less carbon intensive. And we have a few households that are going to be starting a team this Sunday as well. So we're continuing to work on that grassroots level as well. Recently we spoke at Ameren Restaurant Roundtable that was held in Champaign. The roundtable was an opportunity for restaurant owners to tell their personal stories of energy efficiency to other restaurant owners and managers, and also for Ameren to talk about the incentives for energy efficiency that they make available. And we spoke about the Energy Star Challenge, of course, and that is an opportunity to work with and compete with other businesses to improve energy efficiency. We also visited, myself visited the Urbana High School. I think it's a sustainability club or environmental club. Some of those students are here tonight. They've identified a number of projects that they're interested in pursuing, mostly focused around the actual high school building to improve the sustainability there. And so hopefully we'll be following up with them and supporting them in their projects at the school. And also we discussed with them coming to the SAC probably next month, but maybe some folks will come and talk tonight as well, and sharing some information about the projects that they're working on, and potentially they'll bring projects that they want to partner with the city on or suggest or recommend to the city. I also spoke recently at the Illinois Municipal League Conference in Chicago regarding our bulk solar purchase program. There was maybe 75 people in the room. A representative from Ameren spoke about net metering and how they work that. And then Peter Murphy from the Midwest Renewable Energy Association and I spoke about our program. And we really took it as an opportunity to pitch this as a model that's really useful and beneficial for other cities to adopt. And so we talked to a couple of folks afterwards and spoke to some people on the phone, and I think there's probably a couple more cities that are going to take this model, that they've done in Milwaukee, done in Chicago, and also in Urbana-Champaign. U-Cycle staff have also provided materials to Urbana Free Library's shredding event. That was September 24th. Supporting that event, tying in folks who are interested in that privacy and recycling with other recycling activities that we're participating in, including battery collection. So our next scheduled meeting would be November 1st at 7 p.m. in council chambers.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Scott this evening? All right. And let's move to continuing business. And we have one item under continuing business, which is youth engagement. And Scott, you mentioned that we're going to wait until next month for a report.
Potentially, we had put this item on the agenda and as kind of a placeholder. We've been talking about engaging young folks in sustainability generally and in the work of the Sustainability Advisory Commission. And so I don't know if there's anyone who wants to speak tonight on either what they've been working on or what the SAC and the city has been working on. But maybe we'll open that up for our offer.
Yeah, if anybody would like to come forward this evening, that you're welcome to do so. And we'll otherwise look forward to hearing from you next month. Is there anybody who does want to address us tonight? All right. Well, thank you. And I also just want to thank you for showing up tonight and, just taking the time to sit and, listen through the full meeting and the full presentations that we're having. So it's really good to see you here. All right, then I think we'll move to our new business and the Compact of Mayors Climate Hazards.
I'm going to change seats. So the document that's being passed around was in your packet. It's very hard to read. I'm going to try and pull up the actual spreadsheet. It might be easier. It's a very large format, and it's locked. The cell sizes are locked, so I can't change that. And so it prints a little funky. We'll see if I can open it up. You may recall that the mayor has committed to the Compact of Mayors promoted by national organizations that we're members of. And the Compact engages cities to participate in a number of greenhouse gas benchmarking and tracking activities. A lot of those activities we already do. And so some of this process is just reporting what we already do in the format they want. Some of the activities that that the Compact calls for are similar to what we've done in Climate Action Plan. Our Climate Action Plan is also an adaptation plan. We had adaptation activities in it. We went through a series of meetings with lots of leaders from local agencies like power company, water company, sanitary district, and got their input about what adaptation looks like in their sector. There is a couple of sections that I wanted to share with you tonight and kind of go through together that we didn't do in the way that they want them done. So I thought we'd go through that. And the first is this current and future hazards. This is one of the items that they, this is the framework that they've presented. Now, we went through this, as I said, with the different agencies and identified things that we, the city, control that have an impact that we want to influence. But I thought it would be useful for us to go through these. There are a couple of categories. So the categories that I've flipped, one of these drop-down boxes on are the ones that I've thought that, impact us. The ones that are blank, I've just left blank as not impacting us. However, there are a few, mostly at the top, which clearly do affect us. If you look at this, the columns at the top, it's a little tricky to see. The first two columns here are a lighter color. These are actually existing conditions determinations. And when I first looked at things like, say, tornado, I was thinking, not existing conditions, but, the impact of global warming. Well, in the report we received from the Midwest Regional Climate Center, they didn't say anything about changes in frequency or intensity of tornadoes, so I left it blank. That was a mistake in that this section over here, this darker section, is actually for impacts from global warming. So a few of these, need to be flipped, and I don't know if anyone had a chance to go through these. It might not have made sense looking at that PDF on a computer screen, but some of these I want to flip. So, for instance, tornado. Probability of hazard, it's pretty subjective, but maybe it's medium. Consequences of the hazard, I think that's pretty straightforward, high, right? And then when we go to change in frequency due to global warming, again, the report that we all received from the Midwest Regional Climate Change Center was silent on tornadoes, so probably none. And then the next column is change in intensity. Again, the report was silent, so none. Time scale. Yeah, then it'll give you a none, I guess. Maybe we'll leave that blank since it's in magnitude of the impact. Also blank, I mean, there's no change in the impact. There's a spot for description. And then there's a column for the assets that it impacts. Let's see here. Yeah, it could be anything and everything, right? And they only give you 3 assets, I guess, to list, and they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 options. So that explanation stated, anything that jumps out at you all that either you have a different subjective determination on, or I skipped, like tornado or maybe hail.
I was wondering about severe wind as well, because I know we get some pretty interesting windstorms here from time to time.
Where's severe wind?
Yeah, it's right below hail. Yeah, it's kind of hail, severe wind, and tornado are all
Oh,
together.
there it is.
Yeah.
So probability, does that happen at least once a year? Is that medium? And consequences are, down branches might damage something, but generally doesn't knock a house over.
Not typically.
Yeah. Hmm?
Do we have access to insurance data, like claims data? Is there a some kind of quantifiable way of there's some dollar claim amount associated with some of these different categories? Although that would be on an event basis, not.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'm not sure if there's a public database, and if there was something that said, Illinois is X dollars a year per capita, and we multiply that times per capita in Urbana, we'd come up with $1. But then,
Right.
is that high, medium, low? Still,
Yeah.
Well, it might give
Might
you
inform
some
you.
basis of comparison, just in that it would be some indication about like how much property was damaged, or, I mean, it doesn't really go into loss of life, but barring that, it might be at least some comparative measure. And then I suppose if those numbers kind of change over time, then that's also a way of kind of seeing if it's increasing or not.
yeah.
I guess severe wind would include anything that's not a tornado, but could be a thunderstorm related.
Yeah. And maybe thunderstorm. I think maybe lightning storm or thunderstorm is in here. Oh yeah, here. And I don't remember the report saying anything about lightning, Actually, that's maybe more frequent. Any others in this chart? There's another chart below that we need to look at, but others in this chart?
Scott, do you know how many jurisdictions in Illinois are part of the this part of the mayor's compact?
I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if they have a map. I'm going to take a guess. Evanston, Chicago.
Looks like maybe, is anybody on our side? Yeah, there you go.
Alton. Oh, yeah.
Great.
Scott, this is
Thanks.
maybe a little bit new, but I'm wondering if, do we have a sense of how we plan to incorporate this as a plan? How to incorporate it to support decisions and in future planning? Is that to be determined, or is that kind of laid out already?
What the compact wants is they want to use this as an opportunity to engage cities in thinking about what impacts they may experience and what they should do about it. My perspective is we did that. We didn't do it this way. This didn't exist at the time. We did it by starting not with this list, but starting with our systems, our stormwater system, our water system, our energy system, so on, right. And then ask the folks running those, given this climate report, given this characterization, how would this impact you, right. And what should we do about it? And we ended up setting aside a lot of sectors and impacts that either are going to be taken care of in the normal planning and capital improvement process, or aren't going to be impacts for us particularly. And then we zeroed in on just 2 or 3 things in our adaptation section that are things that are likely to impact us, that we can do something about, that we control within the city. And so this process is interesting, but I kind of
is
feel
it
like
a way
we've
of
done
documenting some of the
yeah,
to the extent that that's.
If we were writing a new phase of a climate action plan this year, this would be great. We could think anew about adaptation, and maybe we'd have similar, different goals. But to restart or rewrite an adaptation plan when I think our process was useful, it may have been more lean than this.
Right.
So I take your comment on it too.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wonder about is it something that could be presumably we're going to want to revise or refresh like the climate action plan and the water and all these things. And so is this maybe there's some other ideas on how it could be used, but can we imagine this as one possible tool to help with that next revision? Yeah.
We're due to revise, or we're due to create a new plan from 2020 on. Now that doesn't mean between now and 2020 I'm not doing anything that isn't in that plan, right?
Yeah.
But it might be the lean thing to do might be to not rewrite the plan every other year, but if there's an activity that we didn't think of then, that's a good idea now, great, let's talk about it.
Yeah,
and this
right.
could inform that.
Right.
Yeah, I think that would dovetail pretty well, because I know that, when we launched the plan, we had, the idea that we would revisit every other year what the greenhouse gas emissions were, and so maybe we could dovetail it with that activity and, just kind of broaden that out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to be looking at greenhouse gas emissions every year. It'll just be municipal emissions one year, community emissions the next. And I think maybe it was March by the time we got all the data and were able to put it together in a report. And so that's an opportunity to say, by the way, has anything changed in the outlook? Are there new opportunities? I didn't anticipate getting into street lighting this soon, but here we are. Certainly don't want to let an opportunity pass just because it's not in the plan.
Just to be thorough, I want to cover fog, which is the third line down.
Sure.
So medium. And then I think the risk is pretty low, medium low, because we don't usually have any accidents.
Well, okay, so what's the consequence? When we have it, generally not a lot of accidents. There are places with worse fog than us, right?
Yeah.
Change in frequency, I don't know that fog was listed in our report, so probably none. Others on this section, there's one more section here.
Scott, what's the difference between a vector-borne disease and an insect? Oh, yeah, that's insect-borne diseases, right? Vector-borne disease, like mosquito,
Okay, insect infestation.
or so.
So there must
yeah.
be some distinction between an infestation and a vector-borne disease.
Yeah, there would be.
You know,
I don't know if we
I don't
have
know.
data, but I would suspect that there are measurable changes there. And my inclination on a lot of these is like to go ask or seek out advice or input, because if we don't have evidence before us, we don't. But I feel
Yeah.
like that's one that is
that's a pretty
talked
easy
about.
one, and there's a person to
with-
talk to at the health department.
Right, and the range on a lot of the insect vectors is changing as climate changes. There's a lot of mosquito-borne diseases that it's based on how cold winter is,
Mhm.
where they can overwinter and be.
And a lot of these are pretty unclear. Insects maybe is insect an airborne disease? I don't know, or is pollen an airborne disease? I don't know. Just- I can get some guidance on that from the health department and fill those out. We contract already with the health department for mosquito abatement, so. Okay, the next section I didn't fill out. When I had initially read the compliance documents for the compact, I didn't see adaptive capacity in there. And so it struck me as something that was sort of an opportunity that ICLEI and the compact and Carbon had put in, but maybe was not something we necessarily had to do. I double-checked today and found that in the fine print it does mention adaptive capacity at one point. So, we probably need to fill this out for them. The first section is subjective, but these are all things that we're familiar with, right? Everyone knows about the weather. When you go to adaptive capacity, they're subjective, so that, I'll show you the drop-down box, enhance or challenge. But they're really specific sector-type things that if you're not in that sector, you're not going to maybe have a great sense of it. This is somewhat similar to the approach we took in that we went to systems and asked the people who run those systems. But a lot of this is it is sustainability broadly construed, and that's not how our climate action plan is construed. It's narrowly construed to towards the environmental metrics. So, for instance, we have climate impacts. How is that going to impact housing? Is it create an enhancement or a challenge? That's a pretty broad construction of sustainability or climate impacts. So I don't immediately, and again, I hadn't dug into this because I thought it was just extra, but I don't immediately have a good way to address this.
So they wanted you to do one for each of the ones above?
Say again.
They wanted you to do this chart for each variable above that you identified?
They're separate.
Yeah.
They're separate categories, but yeah. So there's a piece in the in the compliance for the compact of mayors that mentions, evaluate your adaptive capacity. I maybe can find the passage. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on political stability as well. That's actually in the list. I don't think I will.
I was just wondering if there might be folks at the Regional Plan Commission that could assist with some of this, because some of these issues seem a little bit more.
I'm sure they
in
can
their
talk about
bailiwick.
something like, say, housing,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they've probably never thought about it in terms of climate impacts.
Right.
And
Yeah.
maybe that's the point. In the end, the value may not be there, but
One thing that I really like about this section in particular, but the exercise is the idea of like a systematic risk analysis, and not that we haven't looked at that or haven't incorporated some of that, So, I mean, it's kind of like looking for the needle, the bad needle in the haystack. Like, what are the gaps or the risks of bad things that can happen related to infrastructure, social fabric, economic conditions, all that kind of stuff. And I guess we're looking at it in terms of, environmental or climate change type things. So, I mean, I can imagine going through a lot of these things and thinking, well, yeah, maybe it doesn't apply, but I guess maybe the point is, like, here's a whole bunch of possible needles, and so maybe one of them applies to us, and maybe it needs to be a broader conversation. And if you find one, I guess we don't know until it's there. What, but it might be nice to point it out. Anyways, that's what I'm thinking about as we look at this.
Yeah, I would echo that. And again, this is the capacity. There's I'm guessing the Dropbox is just enhance or challenge. Is that what that is? So that's like a plus or a minus. But I think our community has, comparatively a lot of assets on the positive side of the ledger here in terms of adaptive capacity. Given the university, given our excellent local government and community engagement, and housing affordability. I mean, there's a lot here, I think, that we should take note of and count the things that we have, not just the vulnerabilities, but the assets in terms of adaptive capacity. Because I think, it's just as useful to take an inventory of those as it is the risks and the negative side. And I agree that the list in itself as an exercise is useful. It's a bunch of, it's a checklist to make sure you've turned over all the rocks.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the challenges is that there are competing checklists, and everybody wants you to do theirs. And so you end up doing kind of the same exercise over and over again. So, for instance, if we were to, and we'll talk to RPC about this, but if we were to share this with RPC, they probably, we have the planners have something similar to that. We have our own framework. I like these third-party frameworks because they focus your attention, and so you're not creating something from scratch. But it is a challenge when, so there's another one. So you compare this, if we do this year, and then, the STAR community rating system 5 years from now, they're very similar. STAR is sustainability broadly construed. So we'd be doing a similar thing, but slightly different. And so that's a challenge.
Just think your full-time job could be, filling out checklists.
Filling out checklists. Sometimes it feels that way. Let me read you the passage, by the way, where it does refer, the compliance refers to adaptive capacity. It's at the end of a paragraph on vulnerability, which I think is, I'm not sure where vulnerability is listed in here. It says vulnerability is a function of the character, magnitude, and rate of climate variation to which a system is exposed, its sensitivity, and its adaptive capacity. So seeing that is what prompted me to bring this up tonight.
Well, so, you one thing that you mentioned was, in our adaptation section, one of the things we had some people come in. You've invited different people to come in, and so I guess and maybe this was a suggestion that you had, but I imagine looking at this, and I'm separating just the concept of this thing and the information that's putting out there from the actual compact process. I'm just kind of separating from the certification thing and just saying, well, let's just look at this information. And so is this, I wonder if this kind of gives us a template for some of the presentations or speakers that we want to call in and talk about things. And, as Steve said, kind of turn over rocks and things like that. Is that a potential source of interesting conversations that could happen in this forum? Is a thought.
I think it would function as a starting point where you could hand this to somebody, show the drop downs and the options that are available, and say, what does this mean to you given climate impacts? When I look at this list, a lot of these, my division doesn't have any jurisdiction for. My department doesn't have any jurisdiction for. Some of them, the city doesn't have any jurisdiction for. And so there could be a lot of exercise without getting, it's sort of a treadmill, I guess, and use the exercise metaphor, running and not going anywhere. And that concerns me. That said, if we want to get compliant with the compact, somehow we have to address this section.
So yeah, I get your concern. That makes sense. And we've had that same thing with the climate action plan. There's this little slice that the city has direct control over, and then the rest of it, y'all can do what you want. Hope you'll be interested in helping us out here. But in this, so this is kind of the same thing. And so if just fostering the dialogue, maybe that moves some action that's beyond our direct control.
Yeah.
If to the extent that we think that people think that's useful and something that's appropriate for here.
Yeah, it occurs to me that maybe a lean way to approach this is to package up this information where it's easily readable and share it by email with lots of different owners and agencies of systems, and ask them to make comments on what applies to them. And also leave it open if they want to come and discuss it at SAC, they can. But that way we may be able to let them think on it on their own time, and then get back to us, and we can just integrate all of their comments together and maybe make sense of some of it.
I like that.
Yeah, that was well said. I agree. I think that's the right answer here. So it's definitely true that the city doesn't have the jurisdiction or the wisdom about all these factors to write the definitive statement of them. But just like our climate action plan, we can wrap our arms around it. We can use that document to identify the resources by others and try to encourage just awareness of all the pieces that go into especially the adaptation piece, because there's a ton that are outside the scope of the city, but that are part of the city's risk and mitigation or adapting to that risk and continuing to flourish and grow. All these factors have to work. So
the other thing that occurs to me is ICLEI staff who are intaking these forms contacted me today, checking in on where we're at. So I may put it back to them and say, hey, this is how we're viewing this. Does that work? And maybe they'll have some recommendations too. But
just also want to say, I, like all of us, appreciate that your time is scarce and resource constrained and all that stuff. So, I'd be interested in a conversation about, if we want to do something, can we divvy up tasks and figure out ways to kind of share the load on that? Just saying.
What could be helpful is, name and email of who might fit with these different categories. Some of them, are obvious to me. Some of them not so obvious.
Mm-hmm. Is there, the PDF is not interactive like this one. There? Can we get the? Is this spreadsheet sendable?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think of these as being something that we don't have control of, but they influence us.
Right.
So.
To kind of know what.
So we're not directly managing these things, but indirectly they have some.
Right. So we want to kind of be aware of what those capacities are.
Right. One of the things Andrew Revkin says about the problem of climate change, the big conundrum, so it's a wicked problem. It has all these dimensions, and just going through this list, there is, a climate inflected factor affecting all of those things. And so it's like, oh my gosh, climate change is going to be so disrupting, but it does mean that there's, infinite niches for people to get involved and make a difference towards adaptation. So there's a role for artists, there's a role for children, there's a role for people in every line of work and with every kind of expertise to be part of the collective solution to it. That's another way of making this, by making it visible and acknowledging that, I think it helps people figure out where they could pitch in and chip away at a place that makes sense for them.
And I think that is all for our compact compliance. I think there are some off reporting year obligations, some activity reporting. I don't think that's going to be a big deal. No, they haven't presented a format or anything like that for that. So I guess cross that bridge when we get there. But I think after this, we're well on our way to compliance. I don't know if there's any cities that have declared their full compliance yet or not. Probably there are. But I think we can finish this piece up and then check on some of the off-year reporting, and we may just go back in time and report in one of our past off years just to, if that works and it gets us checked off, and we can declare compliance, and then the things that are continuous forever, however many years that goes on, we'll continue to do and maintain our compliance.
Any other comments or questions on this? All right. Thank you. Yeah. Do we have any announcements this evening?
I was going to announce something, but I'm not sure if I need to yet. But okay, there's going to be a movie. There's going to be a pre-release screening of the Before the Flood at the university on Tuesday, October 18th at 7 p.m. at the Atlanta Union Room 407. It's climate change documentary from Leonardo DiCaprio and Fisher Stevens.
And he's going to be here personally, right?
I don't think so. But
Any other announcements this evening? All right. Seeing no further business before us, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right.